Welcome back. This week, a group of high school kids from Miami-Dade trekked up to Tallahassee to lobby the legislature on a bill they helped write. The bill would allow schools across the state to carry the drug naloxone, also commonly called Narcan, which can save the life of someone overdosing on opioids. But before I introduce the students, why don't I let State Senator Jason Pizzo explain how the bill came about. This is from last week's Criminal Justice Committee meeting.
Folks, you can tell your kids that if they're civically engaged, they can change stuff. So in the crowd today, I'm pleased that we have Miss Genna Grodin and we have Asher Lieberman. Folks, these are two of the three. Jolie Dreiling was the third high schoolers who brought me the idea of putting naloxone in schools, which many of you have supported through committees to save kids' lives. So Genna last year had sent me an email saying, Senator, if you have the opportunity to read my presentation to the school board. I wrote her back saying, I'll do you one better, I'll file a bill. So if we're going to be saving lives by providing Narcan in schools throughout the state of Florida and saving kids from opioid overdoses, you have those two teenagers right there to thank. So I'd like to acknowledge them today.
Now, that was in the state Senate, but no good deed goes unpunished, and the bill has hit a snag in the Florida House. Let's get into this now with those three high school students. Joining me this morning is Asher Lieberman, Jolie Dreiling, and who both go to Ransom Everglades, and Genna Grodin, who attends Miami Beach Senior High. I apologize if I butcher any and all of your names.
Not at all.
All right, well, let's get started with Asher. How did this bill come about? How did this idea of allowing schools to be able to have Narcan on their premises come about?
So the last 2 summers, I volunteered at the needle exchange program, and basically we gave out needles to people who needed it to help stop the spread of infectious disease. And one day, a man came in, and he was a lot younger than majority of the people that I had seen. And this was one of my first days. I was still pretty new to the whole scene. So as he was leaving, I actually recognized the symbols on his hat, and he was a rower. So I asked him about it, and he had graduated not much earlier than I had gotten to the high school. And I thought, like, this is crazy. There's someone here that's basically from the same background as me that's affected by the opioid epidemic. And that just proved that it doesn't discriminate. You can come from any school, you can look like anybody, and you can still be affected by this epidemic. So another big thing I had to do there was give out Narcan, which is the drug that revives people who overdose on opioids.
And we've seen that. We've seen what that drug can do. It's amazing. Like when the fire department arrives often on the scene of an overdose and they inject Narcan, the person will literally just sort of pop up and wake up.
Yeah.
You know, so it is an amazing life-saving alternative, and yet it's not in the schools. And part of the reason, as I understand, that it's not in the schools is the concern by some school districts that if they don't have doctor's permission, or if they're not protected under the law to be able to issue or distribute this type of medication if needed, that they could be sued. So liability being a concern, this bill that you helped ending up coming up with would give the school districts protection, which would therefore allow them, doesn't require them, but would allow them to carry Narcan.
Right.
Now, how did you two get involved with, I mean, obviously you three have known each other for a long time. So Jolie, how did you end up getting part of this?
I had actually been working on an opioid research project about addiction in America. And so Asher knew that I had experience with this cause, and I felt very passionately about ending stigma towards addiction, and I really think it was something high schools needed.
And Genna, you are the one who ends up bringing in State Senator Pizzo, because you had approached him just to sort of give him information, correct? So what happened then?
So I reached out to Senator Pizzo, hoping that he'd remember me from a meeting we had a month before, and I gave him some facts about how the opioid crisis has affected our community and why this is important to him. And in fact, that morning he had filed a bill to put labeling on prescription opioids, so I thought it was of his interest. And I just wanted us to get a meeting with him to discuss our proposal, and he reached back and 24 hours later with a bill.
So basically, you just wanted to provide him some information. He took it one step further and said, information is nice, I'm going to actually try to get something passed. And as I understand it, tracking the bill through Tallahassee, it's passed several committees unanimously in the state Senate, but there's a companion bill sponsored by State Representative Joe Geller in the House that hasn't had a hearing yet. What's going on in the House, Jolie?
Well, we realize that there's some misinformation going around the Capitol, and many House representatives believe that this bill is redundant, when actually there are statutes that refute and contradict what they're saying. So we want to allow schools to have an easier pathway to be able to have this Narcan.
Asher, this is sort of similar to when they talk about it being redundant. That's sort of a silly argument. There's already, like, for instance, there's a law in the book about EpiPens that would protect school districts from who end up, if healthcare providers there or the folks there need to use an EpiPen, they can do it and not worry about being sued as a result. This is the same sort of thing, correct?
Right. Basically, the bill was written within the same terminology as the EpiPen one. So it's kind of crazy to me that people are refusing to even hear it in the committees. And it's even more interesting, the fact that they all believed that there's already a bill that allows the Good Samaritan law, already allows nurses to give out Narcan in schools. But as we've learned, that actually there's another statute that actually contradicts that one and says, no, nurses need to get an order from a doctor first.
Well, Genna, that's the reason to have a hearing, wouldn't it? If you have a hearing in the House, then you could sort through these issues and figure out what's right or not, but yet they refuse to have a hearing. How frustrating is that?
It's extremely frustrating, as all we want is to be heard. At least if the bill ends up dying, okay, but at least it has had its chance to live and be recognized for all of our hard effort. And
as I understand it, anyone can jump in on this, Florida, this bill exists in other states, correct?
Yeah. So
where else has this bill been enacted?
So I know at the time when I first started researching, 10 other states had laws that allowed Narcan to be administered in schools. I believe that Maryland was one of them, and we actually made contact with the woman who promoted that law in Maryland, and she kind of helped us with some tips and some struggles that she went through.
Jolie, you went up to Tallahassee. I'm going to say, because you're young and I'm old, you went up there wide-eyed and optimistic, and you run into this roadblock up there. How do you now view Tallahassee? How do you view the legislative process at this point?
I still believe there is some hope for the legislative process. I think that there is definitely misinformation, and it's hard to communicate among all those people. But I think that if they give our bill a chance to just be heard, then that will sort out.
Well, let's be clear about a couple of the players here. So the chair of the committee that has so far refused to have this bill heard is State Representative Colleen Burton. She's a Republican. But the other person who could have an effect on this bill is the Speaker of the House, Jose Oliva, who comes from right here in Miami Lakes. If the Speaker said, have a hearing on this bill, there would be a hearing on this bill. Whether it passes or not is up to the members at that point. Have you thought about trying to reach Speaker Oliva?
Yeah, so actually we did reach out to him, and a couple emails and a couple of phone calls too, but unfortunately he was very busy, and they all have really tight schedules. He's
too busy to meet on an issue that could help save children's lives across the state by providing this drug in school districts.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to, maybe people could contact Speaker Oliva's office and tell him to move forward with the bill about Narcan in schools.
Right. It's unfortunate that these legislators find the bill to be unnecessary when it's not mandating that schools stock Narcan. It's an unfunded legislation.
I gotta cut you off there, but sometimes I think they're unnecessary. It's a shame. All right, well, again, we're going to follow this closely. We're going to see what happens. We'll keep the pressure up. I want to thank you all. Now you made me a little bit more optimistic. All right.